We both work for CZ. CZ is a healthcare insurance company. So we've got a lot of experience with purchasing healthcare. And we want to share our experiences with purchasing healthcare today with you and give you some insights on how you can choose in this market. So this is the objective of today, to gain some insight into choosing. And to give you an example of what I mean with choosing in the market for corporate healthcare, let me describe a case that you probably will recognize, given that you're all HR professionals. So imagine a company in which a manager of a certain department walks into your department, your office, the HR office, and tells you about a team member, let's call him Bob, that shows symptoms of an approaching burnout. And this manager asks you as HR professional, what can I do about it? How can I help my team member? I want to do something for Bob. And of course, as a HR professional, you know that there are many companies, many healthcare suppliers that can help Bob. But do you know which one you should choose? And if you know which one you should choose, is that based on remarks from other colleagues or former experience? Or have you got a system in place which makes you to choose the right provider? It's about that question that we talk today. And to make sure that we're all on the same page here, let me give you a definition of what we mean with the market for corporate healthcare. So our definition within CZ is that corporate healthcare is about specialist healthcare services focused on work-related healthcare that aim to prevent sickness, limit absence periods, and increase productivity. So in short, it's about work-related healthcare that we're talking about today. And the agenda that we want that we have for today is basically 3 different short sessions. So to say, we want to put 3 little workshops in this big workshop. The first is about choosing behavior that we measured with a survey amongst the HR professionals in the Netherlands. So how do HR professionals on this very moment choose for corporate healthcare? This will be done by Wouter in an interactive manner, so be prepared. The second one is about the market. What does the market look like and what do you have to choose from, so to say? And the third one is going from theory to practice. We will discuss the Fokker situation, the Fokker case with Hanko van der Geest from Fokker, so to give you an idea of how this works in practice. So let's start with Wouter.
Thank you so much. I will use the mic as well. Well, I will try. Karel mentioned already that we did a survey with a lot of questions, and we thought, well, maybe let's start and ask you the same questions as we did in the survey. And the first question you can see over here. So how many providers does your organization use? And since you volunteered already, since you came into the room, of course, you will be the first to answer the question for your organization. Do you know how many providers?
2, I believe.
2?
Yeah.
Small company, so 2 providers, and you provide a network for all the occupational health services. Okay. Gemi, good morning.
Good morning. Also 2.
Also 2. Also 2. Anyone more than 2? 2 providers. Okay. Well, I know Hanko has more, but we will talk about that later. The answer is, looking at the provider network, over 60% have a fixed provider network. So that means that over 30% doesn't have a fixed network and uses separate providers instead. And the average of all the companies we asked in the survey, over 50% has no more than 5 providers in the provider network for all the issues that well, you can have in your organization and you might need occupational health service for. So that's over average 5 providers. And well, in our opinion, that's not very much, of course. And another question is, well, if you have these providers, how many interventions do you use on an annual basis within your company? Well, there's of course a lot of difference in size of companies, but I will ask you for the average. Can I ask you how many interventions you know?
Sure, but the company is about 2,500 people, and I think 15 interventions per year, but depends on the intervention. Some is burnout, some is occupational hazards or something like that.
Okay, 15 interventions, 50 for a company of 2,500. Okay. Any other? I will not ask my colleagues, of course.
What do you mean by intervention?
An intervention, that's a good question. An intervention is, well, Karel described the case already. For example, an employee has a burnout, and what you can do is you can use an intervention, so to say. So a service, an occupational health service, a psychologist, a regular psychologist, or mindfulness training, etc. So that is our definition of interventions.
Okay, and that's also what you mean by providers. It's not insurance companies.
The providers is not the insurance company, but might be mindfulness training, time management, or whatsoever. There are. I will get to that later on, and Karel will talk you through the market, what's on the market, and then you will learn what types of interventions and providers are on the market. And it is, well, it's huge. Okay, so this is good, the definition of interventions, yeah. The answer we found in the survey is that there is very, very little insight in the use of interventions. How many interventions are used in your company? So almost 60% hasn't got a clue about the interventions used in the company. And there's an average of 37 interventions a year. That's what we asked, you guys really, the HR professionals. On an annual basis, per year.
Yes, but per how many employees?
The survey is an average of all types of countries, so companies. So, of course, a company of 2,500 has, I think, another amount of interventions a year than a smaller company. But on average, it is 37.
Yes, 37 for how many employees? 37 per year for how many employees?
We didn't measure it on an average amount. Another question. Do you have insight in what the interventions cost? Can I ask you, for your company, have you insight in how much your company spends on interventions a year?
No, it's not my role, and I'm just new for 4 months, so I would say no. I could make a sort of assumption.
You couldn't tell at the moment. Okay. Can I ask you? You know? You do? Can I ask you?
Yeah, I do have insights in the costs. So what we pay as a company, and but we don't know what the insurance paid for the persons.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand. But the good thing is you have insight. You measure the costs of interventions. Okay. Well, that's a good thing, because we found that there is very limited insight in what interventions cost. Just 43% have no insight in the costs whatsoever. And another thing is that they couldn't tell what the costs are of provider A as compared to provider B or C. So actually you do not know what you buy, if the price is a fair price as compared to what you get for it. And that.
But I think the costs are not the only part of it. Also, the quality of the intervention is very important, because you can have a cheap intervention, but if it doesn't make sense, yeah, it's even scrap. Yeah.
And thank you so much for this intervention, because that was the next question we asked in the survey. Can you tell something about the quality of the intervention you deployed? Okay, and I stay with you for this question. Do you have insight in quality within your company?
Yes, we we know which interventions we are satisfied with, and that's why we make our physician make the decision to which intervention a person goes, especially with mental interventions, because there are a lot of interventions, and he can make the right decision for the right person.
Well, that's a good thing that you do it within your company. As I understand, you measure the quality, and with this insight, you choose what intervention, what provider you choose for what type of intervention needed. Okay. Well, with this answer, you are very alone, so to say. Because over 50% doesn't have insight to the quality that is delivered, that the provider delivers. So that makes it, of course, hard to choose. If you do not have an insight in the quality, why should you choose intervention A, B, or C, or provider A, B, or C? So it's kind of a black box, and there are so many interventions on the market, and not all of them are evidence-based. And evidence-based will mean that there is scientific approval for this type of treatment. And of course you will understand that if you don't want a black box, it's very important that you know if the treatment you will put in is evidence-based, because that makes well the success rate a lot higher, of course, as you will imagine. Okay, well, this survey we did here in the room learned us a lot, and we will share some insights now. Karel will on the market of providers and interventions.
So what we've learned so far, by the way, we are using the microphone not because this is such a giant room, it's because of the picture that's being made, the movie that's being made. That's the only reason. So what we've learned so far is that not many companies do make conscious choices for corporate healthcare. And what I'm going to tell you is that there is a lot to choose from by describing the market, and that it does make very much sense to make a conscious choice. I'm going to do that by sharing some results of a recent study that we conducted and recently finalized into the market, in which we identified every single provider of corporate healthcare and studied them, looked into their website, called them if necessary, in order to gain an overview in the market. And let me start with giving you what we found overall. In the Netherlands, there are 800 different providers of corporate healthcare. 800 suppliers that claim that they can help you as a company to create a culture of well-being, a healthy company. And if you, of course, these 800 providers can be divided into different groups, segments, if you like. We did that, and we created 10 different segments that give you an idea of how the market is built up, so to say. And I'm not going to walk through all these different segments, but I just want to give you a couple of examples to give you an idea of what's behind these segments, what we mean by a segment. So first, let's talk about the mental specialists. It's 20% of the market. These are the healthcare suppliers that are focusing on mental problems on the work floor. So it's most often stress, burnout problems. Think of the example I gave in the beginning of the workshop. That's the typical kind of problem this segment is dealing with. An example in the Netherlands is HSK, a very well-known company. See people nodding. It's a big-sized company that does help you with these kind of problems. So the segment to the right is a similar sort of segment, almost just as big as the first segment. They focus on physical problems, either because of desk work, strains in your neck or in your shoulders, or because of physical labor, bless you. Physical labor that does give you physical problems. A very well-known example in the Netherlands of this segment is Visergo, or Ergo Optima, maybe known as well. It's a big segment as well. So another interesting segment I want to point out are the vitality specialists on the right top, 12% of the market. I will come back to this in a minute, But these are most often small companies that focus solely on creating a culture of health and well-being in your company. So it's purely about prevention. I'll come back to them in a minute, as I said, but you can think of Lifeguard as an example, or Medic Info as another example. And maybe the last example of this sheet to give are the reintegration specialists. So it's 11% of the market. Most people, when they talk about corporate healthcare, they only think of this segment. It's the most well-known example in the Netherlands is Winnock, a very big company that helps you, just as the other companies in this segment, helps you to limit absence periods and get people as soon as is responsible, as is medically responsible, back to work. So that gives you an idea, 800 suppliers into 10 different segments. Is this picture clear for you? No questions? Feel free to interrupt and ask a question. So, if you look to the providers behind these 10 different segments, there are a couple of things that you will note, and I want to share a few of them with you. The first thing is that this market is very, very young. It's really an immature market, almost just into existence, so to say, because 70% of the market is not older than 15 years, and 20% of the market is only there for 5 years. So it's a really young market. If you compare it to the regular healthcare market, think of hospitals, for example. They've been around for ages, whereas this market just is developing. And the other thing is that it's a really diverse market. You see the diversity in the different segments that I just described. But also if you look to, for example, coverage. Where do they work? Have they nationwide coverage or maybe even international coverage? Where did they come from? What's their background? Are they regular healthcare providers moving into the market? Or are they specialized in corporate healthcare? And also if you look to the size and the people that work into the company. Are they a big supplier or a small supplier? Have they got medical expertise in their company, or are they working with different kind of solutions? So to give you an example, an idea, you can find just as easily a very small corporation of physical therapists that moved into this market a year ago in order to find a new adventure. As you can find a large hospital that has a spin-off activity into the market of corporate healthcare, or you can find a big company focused solely on corporate healthcare and working with more than 50 people. So a very young, immature and a diverse market. And the second thing that you will note if you dive into this market, or that we noted when we dove into this market, is that the right word, dove into the market? Natives, yes? Yeah, I'm doing all right. Is that there's a real shift to prevention and innovation. Of course, I already described the vitality specialists in the top right. These are the new kids on the blocks. The new companies that focus solely on prevention, try to go to the root of the problem, help you with creating a culture of well-being, programs around lifestyle coaching, prevention, etc. These are on the front row of the shift towards prevention. But also if you look to the more traditional suppliers, the regular medical specialist, the physical therapist, or the psychologists, and that move into this market, you see that they also all talk about prevention. You could almost call it a hype, if you like. But of course, it's very important to go to the root of the problem and to make sure that you're not only dealing with the symptoms of work-related health problems, but you want to make sure that you're dealing with the providers that really know where they are talking about. Because we didn't find any provider that did not give ideas on how to implement prevention, whereas the real knowledge on what prevention really is lies with just a couple of them. So that's just to give you an idea of the market. A young market, immature market, 800 players moving towards prevention and innovation. Back to the question, how do you choose in this market? This is quite a challenge. You've got 800 players into 10 different segments. And what we know, just to make matters a bit more complicated, there are on average 5 interventions. If you've got a question, feel free to ask. No questions?
So
talking about that we have to focus on what we want in our company,
Yeah.
because otherwise it will spread within the 4,000 interventions.
Exactly. Well, thanks for underlining the messages. So on average, 5 interventions per supplier. That makes 4,000 possible interventions that you can choose from. And the question is, how do you choose? And the first thing we looked into is, are there any quality labels? Are there any professional associations? Are there any markers that indicate quality so you can be helped by choosing? And as you can expect with an immature market, a very young market, this is difficult. The market is not very transparent. So if you look to price, for a starter, only a quarter of this market is transparent about the prices they offer you. The remainder of the market does not give any price on the website. And if you want to know the prices, you've got to ask them for a quote for you, which makes it very difficult to compare the prices amongst different suppliers. Also, if you look to quality labels and professional associations, only half of the suppliers is member of a professional association or is using a quality label. And also, if you look to the quality labels, there are more than 7 quality labels used by these suppliers, we found. That makes it quite difficult to really make a choice based on quality label, right? And also the professional associations, we found, and I'm not overstating this, we found 15 different professional associations that these suppliers are member of. So you'll understand, you get a bit lost if you want to use this as a quality indicator. So the question is then, how then do we choose? What is the way to make a choice in this market? And we've developed a few core principles that I want to share with you, just lightly, and if you want to dive into them more deeply, we can do that afterwards, so we can share some of our material on it. Let me check the time. How much time do I have for the principles? 5 minutes. So 4 principles for 5 minutes. It's doable, right? The first is be aware of the employee's stage. And what we mean with employee stage is that every employee that is dealing with with work-related health problems is going through different stages. If you think of the example I gave you in the beginning, Bob, the burnouts, he's probably started with experiencing stress without really being aware of it. The next stage is experiencing stress with being aware of it, but not being aware of the health implications of it. And so on and so on. In the part that Wouters together with Hanko will present in a minute, we will give you an example of this. But for every work-related health problem, you've got to be aware of the fact that people are moving through different stages. And we at CZ, we worked out these patient journeys, so to say. And what you need to do is to be aware that different kind of providers are specialized in care for different stages. That brings me to the second core principle. You want to choose a provider based on his specialty. But to do so, you need to be aware what their specialty is. And as I showed you, there are quite a lot of different specialties, 10 segments, but within the segments you've got specialists as well. So to create a provider network with enough specialists around you, so you can choose the right provider for every case that you encounter, is very, very important. And to choose a provider based on specialism is just a matter of asking the provider. And in our experience, if you ask a provider, what's your specialty? How can you really, where are you really good at? The first answer that you get is always, I'm good at everything. Just give me your cases, I'm good at everything. But if you ask through and you ask again, but what's really the most successful type of intervention that you can give, you will get an answer. And that's quite a good indication of the specialty that they developed. And of course, we've mapped all the different suppliers to their specialties as well. So feel free to ask us if you want as well. And these two are together linked, the first and second principle. Because if you've got a case, you've got to map a specialist onto the type of problem that you are dealing with and onto the stage in which the particular case is in, so to say. So the third principle is prioritize evidence-based interventions. As Wouter already said, evidence-based means that there is scientific proof for the effectiveness of an intervention. Our guess, our estimation is that around 30% of the interventions offered in this market is evidence-based. That doesn't mean that the remainder of the interventions are useless, but there's just no evidence. It's not being researched yet. So if you can choose between, let's say, two interventions, two options, one is evidence-based and the other is not, go for the evidence-based one. It gives you more certainty on the effectiveness of the intervention. Of course, if 70% is not evidence-based, sometimes you will encounter a situation in which you cannot choose between one being evidence-based and the other not, but both are not evidence-based, and then the principle doesn't help you. So it's only for those cases in which you can be helped. And the fourth principle is choose based on quality and obtain clarity for the quality for your company. And we already discussed this a little bit. It's a nice example of how this can be done. In our experience, this is done by only a very few companies on a really rigid, solid basis. And of course, it is difficult to really organize it, to get procedures in place that really give you feedback on the intervention's effectiveness. But it's in theory, it's quite easy. You only need to ask the employee if he is satisfied on the intervention. So did he like the intervention? And what we know from literature is that that's quite a good proxy for the real effectiveness. If a patient, an employee, tells you that he doesn't have the feeling that he's really helped, then in practice, most of the times, it didn't really help. It didn't really help. That's a right estimation from the employee. And of course, another metric is to measure the absence periods. If the interventions are in place and the absence periods are reduced, or if absence is even prevented, then the intervention is working. You can do this by yourself as a company, but if you work for a small company, you might want to do it together with other companies, or you might want to do it together with your health insurer, for example. So this gives you an idea of how to really make choices in this market. And now let's go from theory to practice and talk about the Fokker case.
Theory to practice. I can assume that, now you have a little more insight in the market, that you yourself experience a lot of stress of the choosing process. But there's good news, because we will take a small deep dive in the work stress and the work stress market. And if you remember well, the whole market has over, 4,000 interventions. Well, the good news is work stress related issues, only 2,000 interventions to choose from over 450 providers. So that's, is a good question as well. How do you choose as an HR professional? How do you choose when you have this employee, Bob, for example, with the burnout? How do you know what to choose and from what provider, of course? Do you advise Bob time management or mindfulness? Because it's evidence-based, what we learned already. So that's very hard, of course, we can imagine. What provider to choose within work stress? Because how do you know what Bob, in this case, needs? Because what stage, what phase Bob's find himself? That's why we worked out the employee work stress journey. Well, journey is it's a funny word, talking about stress, isn't it? But we talk about it within CZ. So what Karel already mentioned, most of us know Bob when he is unaware of his problems as an employee. And most of the time we find out too late when he's reporting sick that something was the matter with Bob. And that is the moment that you, as HR professionals, get the question from Bob or from his manager, what should I do now? What type of intervention do I have to deploy at this moment? And of course that is very hard. But the good thing is that by mapping the market and all the options that are available on the market, you can choose a bit more thoroughly. But then you still have to know in what phase Bobs finds himself. So what we did is on this employee work stress journey, we mapped it and we made some 20 clusters of types of intervention. So instead of choosing in a black box, it's the first step you take. You define on what phase, in what phase the employee is in the work stress journey. And that makes it more easy to pinpoint what type of cluster of intervention you need and you can choose from, and what providers can deliver what intervention that he needs in that phase. So as we all know, mindfulness, someone who is at home with a heavy burnout, maybe mindfulness or time management, you should have deployed that much earlier in the phase and not at the time when he's reported sick already. So that's the way we think about using interventions, and choosing them more thoroughly in this journey. But now it's time to invite Hanko van Geest on stage to talk about the real practice, of course. Welcome, Hanko. Hanko works at Fokker, Dutch heritage, British Dutch heritage. We have to say now, since it's GKN. And you work as an HR director and compensation and benefits. And my first question, because I asked the audience as well, the first question is, how many interventions do you use within Fokker on an annual basis? I will give you the mic.
Well, before I can answer the question thoroughly, I need to say Fokker is currently having 3,000 employees in the Netherlands, based on 7 locations. And 3 years ago, I couldn't have answered your question because we really didn't know. We didn't know how many interventions, what the cost were, what the quality was. Last year we had 40 interventions, and this year we set a KPI with our occupational health services and the health insurer to have at least 100 interventions a year. And that's a big step because there was hardly any knowledge about it. 40 last year, yeah, and now we are aiming to, at least 100. Yeah, not only illness, but also from a preventive side. Yeah, so the entire employee well-being, and it's very difficult to make sure that the company doctors prescribe any assistance, even in the early stages in the preventive phase. Therefore, we really had to set a KPI, and we meet on a quarterly basis to discuss the KPIs.
Okay, this Mike. We talked about work stress, and for a lot of companies, work stress-related issues are the number one topic they're dealing with, and I think within Fokker this is also the case. So maybe you can talk us through the way you work on work stress, on reducing work stress within all the Fokker departments. What do you do?
Well, work stress is a very common issue within Fokker. In 2015, Fokker was acquired by GKN. So in 2016, we had a big reorganization, which causes a lot of stress. And of course, there's the demanding market, so there's also a lot of stress. And as just has been explained on the path, all the employees are in different phases. So we really need to identify in which phase an employee is and what's the best available help. And together with CZ, we developed a model where both the my HR colleagues, but also the manager, and in a later phase even the employee, can call directly with a assistance line within CZ to discuss in which phase the employee currently is and what kind of assistance the employee needs. And that gives me a lot of relief because I don't have to think anymore about which provider to hire and get the assistance from. So CZ is really helping us in this phase.
Thank you. Of course, there's a question? Sorry.
three times CZ is helping us. I'm really glad for that. But they were developing a model. Can you tell something about that, or do you do that?
I'll ask Franco. He knows best.
Well, we had the question about what type of interventions can we use for our employees. So we ask our occupational health services, we ask CZ, and together we set up a provider boog. Based on the knowledge of those experts in the market, we said, okay, let's make a separate group of organizations that can help us. That was the first phase. But the most important part is how can we choose the correct and best intervention for this employee, because although it's often work-related stress, there's also private part in it. So you really need to deep dive into the individual's case to find the best help for the employee. And therefore the help desk by telephone was implemented by CZ. And CZ is talking with either HR or the manager to the individual case, and then they define what's the best provider that they can use in this situation. So I don't have to call all the 800 providers, just one call to CZ, and that will solve my problem.
Another question about costs. Do you have an amount per employee, or do you have a percentage of the total salary amount of the employees?
That's also a very interesting question. I'm basically responsible for compensation benefits, so I always relate everything to money. Getting an insight in what the actual cost of the interventions are is also very important. Although it's not the most important part for me, because an employee that can't produce costs much more than the actual cost of the intervention. So I really don't care about the cost of the intervention. I really had a big struggle in the last couple of years because in the past the line manager was responsible for the actual cost that was related to the intervention. So we changed the model. We said within my department I've got a vitality manager, and he is responsible for approving all the interventions that are being advised by the CZ desk. So there's no longer an approval necessary from an individual line manager who could be scared of by the cost. And even if the cost will be charged to the specific department, even if the department manager calls us to have a discussion about the cost, we always say it costs much more if you don't help the employee, because then he's unproductive. And that's the end of the discussion. And we also agreed with, for instance, CZ, that together we will find the best way to seek for finance of any of the interventions. So it can be either from the zorgverzekering of the individual employee, but we also have European subsidies which we can use on the preventive part.
My last question would be, what are the lessons learned you want to share with the audience here? But you gave away this one already. I think this is a very important one, because in our opinion as well, in our experience, the money is sometimes a big thing, and it's a struggle to put in the intervention when the money is so important. But maybe, because this was one, maybe you have another giveaway lesson learned you want to share from the Fokker case?
Yes, I will. It was already told by Jos Akkerman this morning, the professor. He said, well, don't think that you can organize plans and programs for your employees. The employees must discover for themselves what can help them best in their situation. So all the programs that I run within Fokker are based on the model that we provide services, make things available to employees that fits to their current phase that they are in. And once the employee get to know that he has to do something or she has to do something, that's the moment that the employee is open for the intervention, and then the intervention will be successful. So that would be my advice. don't think that from your ivory tower you can define all the best interventions. You can just provide assistance to make sure that the right intervention has been chosen.
Is the help desk only for the CZ insured associates or for all associates?
That's a very good question. It's for all associates, for everything. So it's not mandatory to have an insurance with CZ, and that's a very good service of CZ. Yeah.